On a stormy night, a single act of courage changed everything. Stay with us until the end and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The rain came down like a sheet, a hard, unbroken curtain that swallowed the streetlights and blurred the edges of everything that moved. It slapped the pavement, rattled gutters, drummed on metal awnings until the sound was all one thing, loud enough to drown out engines, voices, even thoughts. Sharon Williams hunched into the downpour as if she could fold herself smaller and slip between the drops. Her jacket was already soaked through. Cold water crept down the back of her neck and pooled at her elbows. She tightened her grip on the plastic handles cutting into her fingers and fixed her eyes on the slick ribbon of sidewalk ahead. She had finished late. The supermarket's airless fluorescence still clung to her, the beep of the register echoing in her ear long after she clocked out. On any other night, she would have walked faster, head down, counting blocks, counting breaths. But the storm had turned every step into guesswork. Puddles hid dips in the concrete. A gust of wind could shove her sideways without warning. Cars hissed by, sending fans of water up over the curb. Somewhere, a siren rose and fell, then vanished beneath the steady roar of rain. She reached the corner and paused, blinking rain out of her lashes. The crosswalk signal blinked red. The intersection looked smeared and unreal, the paint lines damp and shining, headlights sliding like white coins across black glass. She inhaled and let the breath slip out, watching it fog in the cold. Then she saw the small shape break away from the shelter of a doorway. A little girl, light hair plastered to her cheeks, skinny arms, windmilling as she ran. She darted out from the sidewalk with the startled speed of something chased by a shadow only she could see. For half a second, Sharon couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. The size of the child, the movement against the current of rain, the way both feet left the ground in a fearless, slippery sprint. The world focused to a pinpoint, headlights, a boxy truck bearing down, tires cut in their own rivers. The driver hit the brakes. The truck's weight fought the slick road and lost. The squeal came thin and sharp, a sound that felt like it wanted to tear the air in two. The child froze mid-stride, one foot sliding forward, mouth open, eyes wide and bright with the kind of fear that stops sound in a throat. Sharon moved. The plastic bags fell. Their thud against the sidewalk was swallowed by the storm. She lunged off the curb, shoes hydroplaning in the first stride, then finding purchase she didn't question. The road was a black mirror. Her reflection broke in every splash. She reached the girl just as the truck's grill loomed too large, too close, its lights burning white into the rain. She didn't slow to think about angles or timing. Sharon wrapped both arms around the child's ribs and turned her body in a clumsy, practiced half-fall, half-pivot, the kind of instinct that comes from catching heavy boxes an instant before they slip. Momentum carried them to the side, ankles tangling. They hit the gutter as the truck juddered to a stop with one last cry from the brakes, its front bumper tilting past the crosswalk line by inches that felt like miles. Cold water surged up and over Sharon's hip and into her sleeve. The girl's breath left her in a startled woof. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the child's fingers found Sharon's uniform and dug in, trembling with a ferocity that had nothing to do with the temperature. Sharon felt the shake reach her own bones. It made her jaw clench. It made her hold on tighter. "It's all right," she whispered, the words leaving her in a cloud of warmth only she could feel. Her voice came out lower than usual, steadier than she expected. "I've got you. You're safe." The girl made a small sound, half sob, half gasp, and pressed her forehead against Sharon's collar. Rain ran down Sharon's temple and into the corner of her eye. She blinked and tightened her hold for one more count, then another. The truck's horn blared once, abrupt and apologetic, then cut off. Somewhere to the left, a door slammed. Somewhere to the right, a splash said someone had stepped off a curb. "Julie!" a voice called, raw and urgent. "Julie!" Sharon lifted her head. The man's figure came into focus through the rain. Tall, the cut of his coat sharp, even hung heavy with water, hair slicked dark against his forehead. He was moving fast, not quite running, something in his stride caught between control and panic. When he saw the girl in Sharon's arms, he dropped to his knees in the water without hesitation, the cuffs of his coat soaking instantly. "Baby," he breathed, reaching, gathering the child in with careful, shaking hands. "Julie, hey, I've got you." The girl, Julie, let go of Sharon with reluctance that felt like a pull in Sharon's own chest. She collapsed into the man's embrace, small arms thrown tight around his neck. He closed his eyes for an instant, the relief that cracked his face so naked it felt private. When he looked up, his expression held a thank you that didn't yet have words. Sharon shifted back, palms open, making space. Her knees ached from the fall. Cold seeped through the seam where her jacket had split last winter, a familiar sting. She stood, water slicking down her calves and into her shoes, and brushed rain from the front of her uniform out of habit. The truck idled, a low, embarrassed rumble. The driver stayed where he was, hunched over the wheel, his face pale behind fogged glass. The man, Andrew Whitmore, though Sharon didn't yet know his name, held Julie as if the world might make a second attempt if he loosened his grip. "Are you hurt?" he asked the girl, voice barely holding together. "Can you move your fingers, your toes? Look at me." Julie tipped her chin up. Her teeth chattered, her eyes big and wet, but her voice came, small and certain. "I'm okay," she said. She turned, pointing with the earnestness of the very young at the woman who had crouched in the gutter with her. "Daddy, the lady saved me. The lady saved me." Andrew followed her finger. Up close, Sharon could see the strain in his face, the way his jaw worked, the way the muscles at his temples fluttered like the pulse at a wrist. Water gleamed on his lashes. He exhaled, and that breath seemed to be the only thing keeping his words together. "Thank you," he said. The word landed heavy, inadequate. He tried again. "Thank you. It's all right," Sharon said, quietly. She kept her voice low to keep it steady. She didn't want it to crack under the aftermath shaking her limbs. "She's okay. That's what matters." Andrew nodded too quickly, as if agreeing could keep the moment from unraveling. He looked down at Julie, then back at Sharon, searching for something else to say, something that could hold the size of what had almost happened and what hadn't. The rain turned his coat from charcoal to black. The water, dripping from the edge of his sleeve, ticked like a metronome onto the pavement. Sharon bent to retrieve her fallen bags. One had split. A box of pasta had burst from a corner and bowed in the middle where the cardboard had softened. She scooped it up anyway, tucking it upright with the stubborn efficiency that got her through long days. The other bag had held on, the plastic stretched but intact, ghosting the shape of bread inside. She looped it over her wrist. "Please," Andrew said, his voice chasing her before she could turn. Can I, he faltered, the sentence collapsing under the weight of too much to fit in too few words. "At least, let me." Sharon shook her head. Not unkind, just final. "Make sure she gets warm," she said. She glanced at Julie, then back at him. "That's enough." Julie, still tucked against his chest, nodded with the solemnity of someone who understood more than her age suggested. "Thank you, miss," she whispered, the word wobbly. Her small hand lifted from the crook of her father's arm in a shy wave. Sharon's mouth softened. "You're brave," she said. "You did just fine." For a heartbeat, The three of them existed in a bubble of something that felt different than the rest of the storm. Not silence. The rain still hammered, tires still hissed, the truck engine still hummed, but something quiet anyway. A space carved out by relief, populated by the single fact that what could have been a tragedy was now a story they would tell with shaking heads and grateful hands. A gust of wind shoved at their backs. The streetlight flickered once, twice, and steadied. Sharon adjusted her grip on the good bag and turned, stepping up onto the curb with care. The gutter water tugged at her ankles, greedy and cold. Her shoes squeaked. "Wait," Andrew said, that raw edge still in his voice. "Please, I need to." She looked over her shoulder, met his eyes, and gave the smallest shake of her head. "You don't need to," she said, barely louder than the rain. "She's safe." There was nothing in her tone to argue with, no opening for him to wedge another sentence into. It didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like the truth of the moment, completed and closed. He swallowed, nodding once in a way that somehow acknowledged both everything and nothing. Julie's fingers, curled in the fabric of his coat, tightened again, reminding him where the center of this night's steel was. Sharon lifted her chin and walked. The storm took her back up, made a gray halo of the air around her and reduced her to edges and movement. She didn't look back again. The plastic bag tapped against her knee with every other step, a domestic rhythm against the greater percussion of the weather. Her shadow slipped and reformed in every streetlight pool until finally, even the outline of her couldn't fight the rain's eraser. Andrew stood in the flooded crosswalk, cradling his daughter, feeling the ache in his knees from the pavement and the deeper ache in his chest from the fear that still let out quiet aftershocks through his ribs. He pressed his cheek to the top of Julie's head, not caring that her hair soaked through to his skin. She smelled like rain and asphalt and the faint sweetness of the soap she must have used that morning before the day began and the storm declared itself. Behind him, the truck eased back, tires turning with exaggerated care, the driver's face still stricken. No one spoke to the driver, no one shouted. The night had taken enough sound. "Daddy?" Julie murmured, voice small but even. "Yeah, baby. The lady saved me." He closed his eyes for 1 second and let the words pin him to the fact that he had almost lost the one thing he could not afford to lose. He opened them again and looked toward the sidewalk where Sharon had disappeared, as if will alone might call her back so he could find the right sentence, the right shape of gratitude that didn't sound cheap under the weight of what it was meant to carry. But the rain kept its curtain drawn. The street reclaimed its ordinary noise. The signal clicked to walk, then don't walk, then walk again, indifferent to what had just unfolded on its watch. Andrew shifted Julie higher on his hip, felt the child's arms loop again around his neck, and turned toward the slice of street that would take them home. He did not have the words he wanted. He only had the ones he could hold without brain. "Let's get you warm," he said, stepping carefully out of the crosswalk and toward the nearest pool of light. "You're safe. I've got you." Behind him, the storm went on, steadfast and unbothered, washing away the footprints until all that remained of what happened at the corner was the shape of a moment, brief, essential, and already carried forward by 3 people into whatever the next hour would ask of them. The supermarket smelled faintly of bleach, oranges, and ground coffee, the same scent that settled over Sharon Williams' shoulders every day she tied her apron strings and tucked a pen behind her ear. The storm had passed 2 nights ago, but the damp still lingered in her bones. She moved between aisles with the steady rhythm of routine, restocking cans with practiced motions, smiling politely at regulars, answering questions with quiet patience. Her shoes squeaked on the tile, a reminder that they hadn't yet fully dried from the night she'd knelt in the gutter with a trembling child in her arms. That night still came back in fragments. The squeal of brakes, the small body pressed against her, the raw gratitude in the father's eyes. Sharon pushed the memory aside as she straightened a row of soup cans. This was her life again. Routine, shelves, the slow tick of the clock. By midday, the store buzzed with its ordinary rhythm. Carts rattled against one another, scanners beeped at registers, and the hum of voices blended into a low, constant noise. Sharon adjusted the strap of her apron and turned, expecting another customer asking for directions. Instead, she saw him, Andrew Whitmore. Even dressed in a simple suit, he looked out of place beneath the hanging sale signs. His presence seemed to draw a pocket of quiet around him. He walked down the aisle slowly, one hand tucked in his coat, the other holding a plain white envelope. His face was drawn, shadows beneath his eyes, the expression of a man who hadn't slept well since the storm. He stopped in front of her. The envelope extended toward her. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "It's just a way to say thank you." For a second, Sharon froze, her hand still resting against a row of cereal boxes. She looked at the envelope, then at him. The man who had clutched his daughter with shaking hands now stood with all the weight of wealth behind him, trying to turn gratitude into something paper could hold. She didn't take it. Instead, she slowly wiped her palms against her apron and lifted her chin. "I don't need that," she said softly but firmly. Her voice didn't waver. "What happened that night? It wasn't about money." Andrew blinked, caught off guard. He had expected at least politeness, maybe relief, maybe even acceptance, but not this quiet refusal. A shopper passed behind them, pausing to glance curiously at the scene before moving on. Sharon didn't lower her voice, but she spoke as if the world around them had dimmed into the background. "I once studied law," she said. "I wanted to stand up for children who didn't have a voice. When my mom got sick, I left school to care for her. That's why I'm here now." She touched the corner of her apron with her fingertips, then let her hand fall. "It isn't the path I planned, but I do what I can." Andrew lowered the envelope, his gaze fixed on her face. There was no pity in her words, no bitterness, just truth, spoken with the same steadiness she'd used to comfort his daughter. He swallowed, searching for something to say. "I should have thanked you properly that night," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "But I couldn't find the words. I still can't." Sharon's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Just make sure your little girl never feels alone," she said. "That's all the thanks I need." The silence that followed stretched long enough to press against the edges of their conversation. The clatter of carts, the chatter of shoppers, all of it seemed distant. In that small space between them, something shifted. Andrew tucked the envelope back into his jacket, the paper crinkling as he did. He looked as though he had lost a battle he hadn't realized he was fighting. Yet, instead of defeat, there was a strange sense of respect in his eyes. "It wasn't much," he said quietly, "but it was honest." Sharon gave the faintest nod, then returned her focus to the shelves. She lined up cans, her hands steady as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But the air between them still hummed with the weight of words left unsaid. Andrew stepped back, his shoes clicking softly against the tile. He wanted to speak again, but he understood it would be wrong to press further. He turned and walked down the aisle, his tall frame receding into the blur of shoppers and fluorescent light. Later that night he sat alone in his study. The rain tapped against the wide windows, not as violent as before, but steady enough to echo through the quiet house. Julie was asleep upstairs, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Andrew opened his laptop. His fingers moved quickly, pulling at threads until a name surfaced on the screen. Sharon Williams, 34, grocery store clerk. Once enrolled in law school, withdrew after her mother's illness. He leaned back, staring at the glow of the monitor. The words blurred into something more than a biography. He saw the woman who had refused his money, who had asked only for his daughter's laughter, who had spoken with dignity while wearing a faded uniform and standing beneath fluorescent lights. Her words replayed in his mind. Just make sure your little girl never feels alone. He closed the laptop slowly, but the image of Sharon standing in the aisle would not leave him. He thought of the envelope still tucked in his jacket, meaningless compared to what he had seen in her eyes. A thought began to take shape in his chest, not sharp, not complete, but insistent enough to keep him awake long into the night. Maybe there was a way to honor both the woman's lost dream and his daughter's healing. Maybe this wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The week after the storm carried with it an odd mixture of routine and disruption. For Sharon Williams, life seemed to slip back into its old rhythm. She woke to the rattle of the heater, pulled on her uniform, tied the apron around her waist, and made her way to the supermarket where she stocked shelves and greeted strangers. Yet, the memory of the night she had pulled a little girl from the road lingered in her chest, as present as the ache in her back at the end of a shift. For Andrew Whitmore, nothing had gone back to normal. Every time he looked at his daughter Julie, he thought of headlights burning through the rain, of her small frame clinging to a stranger's waist, of how close everything had come to ending differently. Gratitude had settled inside him like a restless stone. He had tried to repay Sharon with money, but she had refused. Her words still haunted him. Just make sure your little girl never feels alone. Julie, however, had no doubts. She spoke of Sharon as if she were already part of their world. "Miss Sharon reads better than the library lady," she told him one morning at breakfast, clutching a crayon drawing. Another evening she whispered, "Miss Sharon made me laugh when the thunder scared me." Her voice always lit with excitement whenever she said the name. Andrew listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes uneasy. He reminded himself to be cautious, but each time he could not deny the way Sharon's presence seemed to guide his daughter back to joy. One Saturday, Julie tugged at his sleeve with determined insistence. "Daddy, we need to see her." "See who?" he asked, though he already knew. "Miss Sharon," she said, her eyes wide with stubborn hope. "The lady who saved me." At first, Andrew tried to distract her. Cartoons, board games, even a promise of ice cream. But Julie's determination only grew. By the afternoon, he found himself pulling into the supermarket parking lot. Julie pressed her nose against the glass as though expecting Sharon to be waiting outside just for her. Inside, the store hummed with its usual noise, carts clattering, registers beeping, customers murmuring. Sharon stood at register 3, scanning groceries with her usual calm. Her apron was tied neatly at her waist, her name tag glinting under the harsh lights. Though she looked composed, she carried a heaviness from the storm's memory that hadn't quite left her. "Good morning," she said to an older man buying bread and milk. He nodded, paid in cash, and shuffled away. The line shifted forward. Sharon moved to the next customer, her rhythm unbroken. Andrew and Julie stepped into her lane. For a moment, Sharon's breath caught when she saw them. She steadied herself and offered her professional smile. "Did you find everything you needed?" Julie slipped free of her father's hand and ran to the counter. "Miss Sharon!" she cried, arms lifted. Sharon blinked, startled, then walked around the register and crouched down to the child's height. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "How are you today?" "I'm good. Thank you for saving me." Julie threw her arms around Sharon's neck, squeezing tight. A few shoppers turned their heads. One mother whispered to her child, "Don't bother the lady." But Julie turned back quickly, insisting, "But she saved me." The tightness in Sharon's chest eased. She hugged the girl briefly before guiding her to the side so the lane could stay clear. "I'm glad you're okay," she said warmly. "You were very brave." Andrew stepped forward with a basket of bread, apples, and eggs. "We came to say thank you," he said quietly. "You already did," Sharon answered, glancing toward Julie with a faint smile. She scanned the items one by one, the machine beeping steadily. When the sale was finished, Julie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Can I show Miss Sharon my drawing?" She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. On it were 3 stick figures under a bright sun: a tall man, a little girl with curls, and a smiling woman. At the bottom, in large, crooked letters, was written Julie. Sharon smoothed the crease gently. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Julie beamed, then tucked the drawing carefully back into her pocket. Andrew cleared his throat. "Do you have a minute?" he asked Sharon. "We can step aside." Sharon glanced toward the next lane and saw a coworker available. She nodded. "I'll be back in a few minutes," she told the manager before walking with them to a quiet corner near a stack of paper towels. Julie crouched down, rolling apples across the floor as if they were toy cars. Andrew kept one eye on her before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About law school, about wanting to help children who don't have a voice." Sharon folded her hands. Her voice was careful. "That was a long time ago. Life went another way." "Do you still want it?" She looked at Julie, who was humming to herself on the floor. Sharon answered honestly, "Wanting and being able are 2 different things. Dreams don't pay hospital bills." Andrew nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But what if we tried something small? Not perfect circumstances, just starting where we are." Sharon tilted her head. "Like what?" "A weekend program," he said. "Read and help, a safe space, workshops about safety, about belonging. You'd lead it. Not as a favor to me, but as your work." Sharon studied him carefully. She saw no pity in his eyes, only sincerity. "Why me?" she asked. "Because Julie lights up when she sees you. Because you stepped in when no one else did. Because you know the difference between a dream and reality. And you still carry it." Something stirred in her chest, not excitement, but something steadier. She let it settle. "I can't leave my job," she said, "and I won't be a symbol. No cameras, no speeches." Andrew nodded. "We start to small, quiet. A room at the community center, books, snacks, kids who know they're safe." Sharon hesitated. "Who pays for it?" "I will," Andrew answered, "and I'll find others. But you set the rules." Julie came up to Sharon just then, placing a shiny red apple in her hand. "For you," she said proudly. Sharon crouched. "Thank you, honey." She stood again and looked back at Andrew. "I'm not promising anything," she said, "but talking is fine. If we do this, it's for the kids, not for your name." "Agreed," Andrew said. Sharon glanced at the clock. "I have to get back." "Of course," he said quickly. "I'll draft something. Practical. Then maybe you'll look at it." Julie tugged on Sharon's hand. "Bye, Miss Sharon. I'll bring you another drawing." "I'll look forward to it," Sharon said softly. They returned to the flow of shoppers. Andrew steered Julie toward the doors, but he glanced back once. Sharon was already behind her register, scanning items with her steady calm. Yet something had shifted in the air between them. That night, Sharon sat in the staff room during her break. The hum of the soda machine filled the silence. She opened her old notebook, the one she had carried since college, and turned to a blank page. She wrote 3 short lines. Safe room, listening circle, reading buddy. She closed the notebook quietly. Not a promise, Not yet, but the weight in her chest eased. Autumn brought a sharper chill to the evenings, the kind that turned breath into mist and made children clutch paper cups of cocoa in both hands. The storm that had nearly taken Julie Whitmore seemed far away now, yet its echo lived in the way Andrew watched his daughter more closely, in the way Sharon carried herself with a quiet weight, and in the way Margaret, Emily's mother, Julie's grandmother, grew more unsettled each time she heard the girl say Miss Sharon with unguarded joy. The annual Lantern Festival was the highlight of the town's calendar, a tradition that had begun as a small neighborhood gathering years ago, but had since grown into something larger. Booths lined the park's walkways, selling kettle corn, cider, and trinkets. Families wandered under strings of golden bulbs hung like vines, while children painted their lanterns with careful strokes. Each lantern carried a slip of paper inside, prayers, wishes, or memories that would be released together into the sky at dusk. This year, the festival carried extra weight. It was the first since Emily's passing. People whispered about what it would mean for the Whitmores. Some expected Andrew to make a speech, a public reassurance that grief had not extinguished his family's light. For him, the event was more than obligation. It was a way of honoring Emily, of showing Julie that memory could become hope. Sharon had not planned to attend. Festivals were for families, for neighbors who belonged, for people who could afford to stroll past booths with wallets that didn't ache. She worked late most nights and saved her strength for her mother at home. But when Julie pressed her hands together and begged, "Miss Sharon, please come see the lanterns with me. They look like stars in the sky," Sharon found herself nodding despite her hesitation. On the evening of the festival, the park glowed with warmth against the brisk air. Sharon arrived in a simple cardigan and slacks, her steps careful across the grass. She caught curious glances immediately, neighbors whispering, some with soft smiles, others with raised brows. She lifted her chin, reminding herself why she had come. Julie spotted her first, darting across the lawn with arms open. "Miss Sharon," she shouted, pulling her toward the lantern booths. Andrew followed behind, his suit jacket left at home, dressed in a dark sweater that softened the edges of his usual composure. Together, the three moved through the festival. Julie tugged at Sharon's sleeve to show her painted lantern, then dragged her from one booth to another. Sharon laughed softly, the sound surprising even to herself. Andrew watched from a short distance, struck by the sight of his daughter's joy. How unguarded it was, how it echoed the laughter that had once filled their home before Emily's death. As the dusk fell, a stage near the fountain lit with warm spotlights. Local reporters gathered with cameras ready. The announcer called Andrew forward. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he stepped onto the platform. His voice carried steady through the microphone, not polished like a boardroom speech, but weighted with sincerity. "Tonight isn't about lanterns," he said. "It's about memory. It's about community. It's about the hands that lift light together so no flame has to rise alone." Applause rippled. Sharon, standing with Julie near the front, saw the pride in the girl's face as she waved toward her father. Then came the part of the program where children were invited to share readings. Julie tugged Sharon's hand urgently. "Miss Sharon, come with me. Please, read with me." Before Sharon could protest, Julie was already pulling her toward the stage steps. The announcer, sensing the moment, handed Sharon a slim book of children's poems. Sharon opened it with trembling hands. The microphone caught the slight quiver in her first words, but as she continued, her voice steadied. She read with warmth, her tone low and comforting. Julie leaned into her, chiming in on rhymes when prompted, mispronouncing words to the laughter of the crowd. Sharon kissed the girl's hair lightly, encouraging her to try again. The audience leaned closer, drawn not by performance but by presence. Parents smiled. Children hushed. For a few minutes, the stage belonged to a woman who spoke as if every child mattered, as if every word carried safety. The applause that followed was warm, genuine. Julie hugged Sharon tightly, whispering, "That was perfect." And then a sharper voice cut through. "This is just a show." The crowd hushed. Margaret Whitmore stepped forward, pearls at her neck, her coat draped elegantly over her shoulders. She had not intended to come, but the nightly phone calls from Julie about Miss Sharon had become impossible to ignore. Now, standing at the edge of the stage, her expression was tight with grief and indignation. "You're using this woman to cover your ambition, Andrew," she said, her voice clear enough for the reporters' microphones to catch. Her eyes flicked toward Sharon. "She will never be Emily." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters raised cameras higher. Andrew stiffened at the side of the stage, but before he could speak, Sharon did. She stepped forward, her hand still resting lightly on Julie's shoulder. Her voice was soft, but the silence carried it easily. "You're right," she said. "I'll never be Emily. I couldn't. She was your daughter. She was Julie's mother. Nothing I do could change that." She paused, breathing carefully. "But I don't need to replace her. I only need Julie to know she isn't alone. That's what matters." Her words were not loud, but they had weight, the kind of weight that silences even whispers. Julie turned to her grandmother, her small voice trembling but firm. "Grandma, she makes me smile again. Mommy would want that." The innocence of the child's words struck harder than any argument. Margaret faltered. For weeks she had seen Sharon as an intruder, a threat. But now, seeing her granddaughter cling to this woman with unshakable trust, she felt something inside her crack. Her lips parted, trembling. She whispered almost unwillingly, Maybe you're giving back what Emily no longer can." The announcer, quick to ease the tension, guided the program back. People began lighting their lanterns, placing slips of paper inside. Families gathered near the fountain, holding their glowing shapes carefully. Andrew moved to Sharon's side, his hand brushing Julie's shoulder. For a moment, the three of them stood together, framed by the rising glow of lanterns. Margaret lingered behind, her face unreadable, but her eyes moist. One by one, lanterns lifted into the sky, tiny flames ascending into darkness. Julie clapped, pointing upward. "Look, Miss Sharon, they're going to heaven." Sharon knelt beside her. "Maybe they're carrying all our wishes up with them." Andrew's gaze softened as he watched them both. The conflict of the past weeks did not vanish, but here, under the glow of rising lights, something new stirred. A fragile hope that grief and love could share the same sky. Margaret stood apart, but when Julie called, "Grandma, come help me, let one go," she found herself walking forward. Julie placed the lantern between them, her small hands guiding her grandmother's trembling fingers. Together, they lifted it. Sharon stood quietly to the side, watching as the lantern rose, carrying with it grief, memory, and the fragile beginnings of understanding. The glow of the lanterns lingered in the night sky long after the festival ended, their faint flickers resembling stars that had been borrowed for just one evening. Families drifted home in twos and threes, children drowsy on their parents' shoulders, the air filled with the fading sweetness of kettle corn and cider. But for the Whitmores, the night's events didn't end with the lantern release. They carried the weight of it back into the quiet of their home, a silence that was no longer heavy with grief alone, but tempered by something new. Andrew helped Julie out of her coat by the doorway. She still clutched the folded slip of paper she had tucked into her lantern before it rose. He crouched down, brushing damp curls away from her forehead. "What did you write in your lantern, sweetheart?" Julie's eyes brightened, and she whispered, as if it were a secret meant only for the two of them. "I wrote, 'Please let Mommy see me smile again.'" The words struck him harder than he expected. He pulled her close, kissed her hair, and murmured, "She sees you, Julie. She always does." When he lifted his head, his gaze caught Sharon's. She had slipped inside after helping Margaret with her coat. Sharon's eyes glistened, not with pity, but with the shared weight of love for a child who had already carried too much. Margaret stood by the staircase, pearls at her throat, her hands folded tightly. For a moment, the house felt as though it held its breath, waiting. She looked at Sharon, then at her granddaughter who was nestled against Andrew. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than the cutting tone she had used at the festival. "You should know," Margaret said, "that every time I look at Julie, I see Emily. Losing her broke something in me. When I saw you with my granddaughter, all I could feel was fear that Emily would fade, that her place would be replaced." She paused, her eyes wet but unyielding. "But tonight, when Julie spoke, I realized she wasn't losing her mother's memory. She was gaining a reason to keep living with light." The admission cost her something. It showed in the way her shoulders sagged slightly. Sharon, standing by the doorway, didn't step closer, but held Margaret's gaze with quiet steadiness. "I would never try to take Emily's place," Sharon said softly. "What she gave your family can't be replaced. I only want Julie to know that she's not alone, that there's someone else in her life who will keep her safe, who will help her laugh when she forgets how." Margaret's lips pressed together, her composure trembling for the first time. She looked at Julie, who turned in her father's arms and reached out a hand. "Grandma," the little girl said, "Miss Sharon helps me smile. Mommy would want that." The child's words, simple and unguarded, broke the last of Margaret's resistance. She lowered herself slowly to the step, her knees stiff, and opened her arms. Julie slid from Andrew's lap and ran into them. Margaret clutched her tightly, burying her face against her granddaughter's hair. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Emily would want your smile. She always wanted that." Sharon stood quietly, giving space. She felt no triumph in Margaret's softening, only the tenderness of watching a wound begin to close. Later that week, Andrew invited Sharon to their home again, not for formality, not for repayment, but because Julie's pleading had left him no other choice. This time, Margaret didn't bristle. She watched silently as Sharon read a story to Julie in the living room, her voice low and steady, the child's laughter ringing bright. For the first time, Margaret didn't see a threat but an ally, someone who had stepped into the gap life had torn open. The weeks that followed brought small but important change. Sharon began meeting Andrew to discuss the beginnings of a community program, something quiet, simple, aimed at giving children a place to feel safe and heard. Light Keepers, Andrew called it, borrowing the name from the festival. Sharon resisted the title at first, uncomfortable with being placed at the center of anything. But as the idea grew, she saw what it could mean. Julie became the heart of it all. She carried drawings to Sharon at every chance, pulled her hand at every visit, and announced proudly to anyone who listened, "Miss Sharon saved me." But in truth, Sharon was saving more than one person. She had become the bridge that carried Andrew and his daughter forward, the reminder that joy could return, fragile but real. One evening, after Julie had gone to bed, Andrew and Sharon lingered on the porch. The night was clear, the stars sharp above them. The quiet stretched, full but unhurried. "You've given her back something I thought she'd lost forever," Andrew said, his voice low. "And you've given me more than I can put into words." Sharon shook her head gently. "You're the one showing up for her every day. I'm just someone who happened to be there at the right time." He looked at her, his expression steady. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment, one person." Inside, Margaret passed Julie's room and paused at the sound of her granddaughter's steady breathing. She pressed a hand to the doorframe, her eyes closing briefly. For the first time in months, she felt that Emily's memory was not slipping away but being honored in a new way, through laughter, through hope, through the people who had stepped in when life demanded it. And for Sharon, standing under the stars with the Whitmores, it was the first time she dared believe that her place in Julie's life was not temporary. It was not about replacing anyone or filling a role that wasn't hers. It was about standing where she was needed, holding space for light to return. The night settled around them gently, no storm, no sharp edges, only the fragile but certain glow of a family finding its way through loss toward something whole again. And above, the lanterns from the festival had long faded from sight. But their lesson remained. Light, when lifted together, could carry hope into even the darkest sky. Some stories remind us that even in the darkest storms, light can return. If this touched your heart, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.